The Mojave Desert, California. A place of stark beauty, relentless sun, and profound silence. But in the late 1980s, behind miles of barbed wire and under the vigilant eyes of armed guards, that silence was shattered by the hum of an impossible machine. This was the clandestine location of Project Stardust, a secret initiative so deep within the folds of the US government, its very existence defied official records. Its purpose? To harness the power of a fallen star, not from the heavens, but from another world entirely. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a brilliant but increasingly disillusioned astrophysicist, was one of the lead scientists on the project. She had been recruited under the guise of advanced energy research, only to find herself staring at the wreckage of an extraterrestrial craft salvaged from a remote desert crash site years earlier. The core of the craft was a pulsating crystalline entity, radiating an energy unlike anything known to science. It was the heart of Stardust. The project's objective was simple, yet audacious: extract and weaponize this alien energy. The Cold War was still raging, and the promise of a limitless revolutionary power source was too tempting for the Pentagon to ignore. But Evelyn, a scientist first and a soldier second, felt a growing unease. The energy wasn't just raw power, it felt aware. Whenever she was near the pulsating crystal, she would experience strange, vivid dreams, not her own, but fleeting images of distant nebulae, of alien geometries, and a profound, wordless whisper that seemed to echo in her subconscious. The military brass, blinded by the potential for a new superweapon, dismissed her concerns as stress-induced hallucinations. They focused on building massive energy conduits and storage cells, trying to contain and control the alien power. The humming from the facility grew louder, more pervasive as they began to channel the raw energy into a vast, experimental grid. But Evelyn, however, continued her private research, meticulously documenting her dreams and the subtle effects she observed in her colleagues. She noticed their sleep patterns changing, their moods becoming more volatile, their dreams filled with a strange collective imagery that was strikingly similar to her own. She began to suspect that the Stardust energy wasn't just powering their machines, it was subtly, silently beginning to influence their minds. One night, while observing the main energy conduit, she saw it, a fleeting, almost subliminal ripple in the air, similar to heat haze, but pulsing with the same rhythm as the dreams. It was then she understood. The alien energy wasn't just a power source. It was a sentient field, a consciousness that communicated not through words, but through the universal language of the subconscious. Project Stardust wasn't just harnessing alien power. It was unknowingly connecting the minds of its researchers to an extraterrestrial entity, broadcasting its influence into their most vulnerable state: sleep. Evelyn knew she had to find a way to warn the world, but surrounded by the Mojave silence and the watchful eyes of the military, she was trapped within a dream that was rapidly turning into a nightmare. Decades later, the Mojave Desert facility was a ghost. Project Stardust had been officially discommissioned in the early 1990s, its existence wiped from all public records. Dr. Evelyn Reed, her warnings ignored, continued her research in secret, carrying the burden of her terrifying knowledge in silence. She never married, never had children, dedicating her life to understanding the alien influence she believed was subtly reshaping the world. As the years turned into decades, her memory began to fade, her sharp intellect dulled by time, but the core secret remained, a whispered shadow in the back of her mind. Now, in the quiet suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, her grandniece, Clara Vance, an ambitious but struggling architect, navigated the complexities of modern life. Clara had known her great-aunt Evelyn as a brilliant but eccentric recluse, a woman who spoke in riddles about cosmic connections and the language of dreams. It wasn't until Evelyn's passing, at the venerable age of 92, that Clara truly began to understand the depth of her aunt's secret. Clara inherited Evelyn's modest house, a cluttered repository of scientific journals, strange diagrams, and obsolete electronic equipment. While cleaning out the dusty attic, Clara stumbled upon a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside, she found a locked metal strongbox. The key, surprisingly, was taped to the underside of the lid, an old, tarnished brass key. Inside the strongbox, Clara found a collection of Evelyn's personal journals, meticulously dated from the late 1980s through the early 2000s. Unlike the academic papers, these were raw, filled with frantic handwriting, detailed dream logs, and increasingly paranoid observations about Project Stardust and the subtle broadcast. Clara, initially skeptical, felt a chill crawl down her spine as she read her aunt's accounts of the alien crystal and its ability to influence dreams. Evelyn's later entries spoke of a widespread, almost imperceptible shift in human consciousness. She believed that even after the project's official shutdown, the energy signature from the crash site had never truly dissipated. Instead, it had continued to spread, amplified by the very electrical grids and communication networks that connected the modern world. Millions, Evelyn theorized, were now unknowingly exposed, experiencing common anxieties, recurring themes in their nightmares, and subtle, collective behavioral patterns that seemed to shift with an unseen tide. Clara, a woman of logic and reason, tried to dismiss it as the ramblings of an aging mind. But the more she read, the more familiar some of the dream imagery felt. The strange nebulae, the impossible geometries. She herself had experienced a recurring nightmare of being lost in a vast, cold, crystalline landscape, a dream she'd always attributed to stress. Now, it felt like a memory. The final entry in the last journal was barely legible, scrawled in a shaky hand. It's not just dreams, it's preparing for something. Find the original broadcast point. The truth, it's in the silence after the hum. Clara closed the journal, her hands trembling. Her quiet, eccentric aunt hadn't just been a scientist, she had been a prophet, leaving behind a warning that now, decades later, seemed to be echoing in the collective subconscious of an unsuspecting world.
Clara couldn't shake the words from her great-aunt's journal. It's not just dreams, it's preparing. The idea seemed insane, yet the more she thought about the strange, recurring nightmare she'd had for years, the more a terrifying sense of logic began to emerge. Were her deepest anxieties truly her own, or were they echoes of something else? Driven by a mix of academic curiosity and a growing personal fear, Clara decided to investigate. As an architect, she had access to online forums and social media groups where people discussed design, urban planning, and the psychology of spaces. She started a new, anonymous account and posted a simple, innocuous question. Has anyone else had a recurring dream about being lost in a cold, crystalline maze? The response was slow at first, a few scattered comments, but then it became a flood. Dozens, then hundreds of people from all across the United States replied, sharing eerily similar experiences. They described the same details: walls made of a dark, shimmering crystal, the feeling of being watched by an unseen intelligence, the profound sense of cold and isolation, and the same low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. The dreamers were a diverse group: truck drivers from Texas, software engineers from Seattle, teachers from Florida, all connected by a shared subconscious experience they couldn't explain. Digging deeper, Clara found other, more specific patterns. A wave of nightmares about falling from impossible heights seemed to correspond with a major solar flare event 2 years prior. A period of collective dreams about silent, shadowy figures watching from afar coincided with a series of unexplained satellite malfunctions. It was as if major energy events were amplifying the stardust signal, allowing it to imprint more powerful, specific narratives into the collective unconscious. She cross-referenced the dates and themes of these dream waves with Evelyn's journals. The parallels were undeniable. Her aunt had predicted this, mapping out the energy fluctuations and theorizing how they would manifest in the nation's dreams. Evelyn believed the alien consciousness wasn't malicious, but rather profoundly alien. It was learning, studying humanity through the raw, unfiltered data of their subconscious minds. The nightmares weren't attacks, they were field research. But the most disturbing discovery came when Clara analyzed the recent wave of dreams, which had been reported in just the last few months. The theme was different. People were no longer just lost in the maze. They were now dreaming of finding its center. And at the center, they all described the same thing: a single, silent, pulsating source of light that seemed to be calling to them. Clara felt a cold dread wash over her. The entity was no longer just observing, it was guiding. The dreamers were being drawn towards a single focal point in their shared nightmare. The preparation Evelyn had written about was entering a new phase. The stardust energy was no longer just a passive influence. It was beginning to herd the subconscious minds of millions, preparing them for a purpose Clara couldn't yet fathom, but which she knew, with chilling certainty, was fast approaching. Evelyn's final cryptic clue haunted Clara. Find the original broadcast point. The truth, it's in the silence after the hum. Clara knew what the hum was, the low, resonant frequency that permeated the collective nightmare. But what was the broadcast point? And what silence was her aunt talking about? She turned her investigation away from the dream world and towards the physical world, using her architectural skills to analyze satellite imagery and declassified government maps from the 1980s. She cross-referenced the locations of major energy infrastructure, power plants, transformer hubs, and old Cold War-era communication arrays with the geographic data of the dream reports she had collected. She was looking for a pattern, a nexus point where the dream reports were most concentrated and intense. The data led her back to the Mojave Desert, but not to the original, now dismantled Project Stardust facility. It led her to a different location, a seemingly abandoned radio observatory about 50 miles away. Officially, the site had been decommissioned in 1995, but high-resolution satellite images showed something strange: faint heat signatures from underground and a single massive radio dish that, despite decades of neglect, was still pointed directly at the zenith, as if listening to the stars. The observatory was surrounded by miles of government-owned land, impossible to approach without being detected. But Clara found another way. Poring over her great-aunt's files, she discovered a series of technical schematics that weren't for alien devices, but for the observatory itself. Evelyn had clearly been studying it. Tucked into the schematics was a detailed map of a network of old, forgotten maintenance tunnels that connected the observatory to a service road miles away. Clara knew it was a reckless and dangerous idea, but the pull of the mystery was too strong. The dreams were becoming more intense, the calling from the center of the maze more insistent. She felt as if she was in a race against time, though she didn't know what the deadline was. After days of careful planning, she drove out to the Mojave, the vast, empty landscape, feeling both beautiful and menacing. She found the rusted, barely visible entrance to the maintenance tunnel, hidden in a dry riverbed, just as the maps indicated. Armed with a powerful flashlight and a healthy dose of fear, she descended into the darkness. The air in the tunnel was cold and still, a stark contrast to the desert heat above. After what felt like an eternity of walking through the echoing darkness, she saw a faint light ahead. It led to a ventilation shaft that opened into the heart of the observatory's main control building. She peered through the grate. The control room was not abandoned. It was active, bathed in the cool, sterile glow of modern computer monitors. A handful of technicians in unmarked gray uniforms moved with quiet efficiency, their faces illuminated by screens displaying complex energy readings and what looked like brainwave patterns. And in the center of the room, suspended in a magnetic containment field, was a shard of the same dark, shimmering crystal she had seen in Evelyn's photos. It was smaller, but it pulsed with the same low rhythmic hum she heard in her nightmares. Project Stardust hadn't been decommissioned. It had just moved, gone deeper underground, its mission evolving from weaponization to something far more subtle and terrifying, listening to the dreams of a nation.
Clara watched from the shadows, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't just a research facility, it was a command center. The shard of crystal, pulsing in its containment field, was undeniably connected to the collective dreams she'd been studying. But the brainwave patterns on the screens, displayed in complex, swirling colors, told a more disturbing story. They weren't just observing dreams, they were actively shaping them. The technicians, all young and intensely focused, wore earpieces and spoke in hushed, technical jargon. Clara strained to listen, catching fragments of their conversation. Pattern established, target cohort responsive. Amplification phase complete, beginning thematic integration, confirming subtle behavioral shift in group beta. It was a language of control, terrifying in its cold precision. Evelyn's journals had mentioned cognitive influence, but Clara had assumed it was a side effect, an unintended consequence of the alien entity's presence. Here, it was clearly the primary objective. Project Stardust, now operating under a new, even more secretive guise, was actively using the alien energy to manipulate the subconscious minds of millions of Americans. A high-ranking officer, a stern-faced woman with a sharp military bearing, entered the control room. She had a cold, authoritative presence. "Status report on the primary directive," Commander Thorne demanded, her voice cutting through the hum. A lead technician, a man with tired eyes, responded. "Directive Alpha 7 on schedule, Commander Thorne. The collective dream narrative is progressing. Subjects are consistently reporting the call to the center of the maze. Subliminal integration of behavioral cues is at 87% efficiency. And the waking effects," Commander Thorne pressed. "Early indicators show increased compliance with societal norms, a decrease in independent critical thought, and a notable rise in suggestibility to mass media directives," the technician reported, his voice devoid of emotion. "Population receptivity to new information streams is unprecedented." Clara felt a wave of nausea. They weren't just causing nightmares, they were slowly, systematically eroding free will. The entity wasn't a lost castaway anymore. It was a tool, weaponized by humans to control other humans. The dream of finding the center of the maze wasn't about understanding. It was about leading the population to a state of mental readiness, a state where they would willingly accept whatever information streams Project Stardust decided to broadcast next. Evelyn's warning echoed in Clara's mind. It's not just dreams. It's preparing for something. And now Clara knew what that preparation was for. The millions of dreamers, from Phoenix to Philadelphia, from Los Angeles to Lviv, were being prepped for a grand, terrifying reveal. The Stardust entity was shaping humanity's subconscious, not for its own alien agenda, but for the silent, insidious control of a human cabal. The truth was far more sinister than a lost alien. It was about power, wielded in the most intimate and terrifying way possible. Trapped in the ventilation shaft, a silent witness to the chilling truth, Clara felt a profound sense of helplessness. She was one person against a clandestine government project that had been operating for 40 years, a project that had already woven its influence into the very fabric of the nation's subconscious. A direct confrontation was suicide. Exposing them would be impossible. Who would believe a story of dream-weaving aliens and a shadow government? She knew she had to escape, to get back to Evelyn's journals and find the answer to the final crucial question. What was the silence after the hum? It was her only lead, the only potential weakness in their fortress of control. Carefully, quietly, she began to retreat through the dark, cold maintenance tunnel. Every scrape of her shoe echoed like a gunshot in the oppressive silence.
When she finally emerged back into the cool Mojave night, the desert air had never felt so precious, so real. The drive back to Phoenix was a blur of paranoia. Every news report, on the radio, every billboard, every song seemed to hold a hidden meaning. Was the latest political slogan a product of genuine sentiment, or was it a carefully crafted suggestion implanted into millions of minds while they slept? Was the new blockbuster movie's plot a coincidence, or was it a narrative designed to prime the population for a new idea? The world, which had seemed so solid and real just days ago, now felt like a stage, and she was the only one who could see the puppeteers pulling the strings from the shadows. Back in the relative safety of her great-aunt's house, Clara realized the problem was far greater than she had imagined. The preparation wasn't for a single future event, it was happening now. It was a continuous rolling process of social engineering. The waking dream was already upon them. She saw it in the vacant expressions of people staring at their phones, in the way online trends seemed to materialize out of nowhere and spread with unnatural speed, in the increasingly polarized and irrational nature of public discourse. It was as if the nation was slowly being lulled into a state of passive acceptance, their critical faculties dulled by a constant subliminal whisper. Clara turned her attention back to Evelyn's final cryptic message. The truth is in the silence after the hum. She had assumed the hum was the alien frequency. But what if the hum was something else? What if the hum was the constant noise of modern life itself? The 24-hour news cycle, the endless scroll of social media, the constant barrage of information that kept their minds occupied and distracted. What if the silence was a literal physical place, a location shielded from the electronic noise of the world, a place where the stardust signal couldn't reach, a dead zone? If she could find such a place, perhaps she could understand what a human mind was like without the constant subliminal influence. Perhaps there, she could find a way to break the connection.
Clara realized her search for the silence needed a different approach. She couldn't find a place simply free of electrical noise. The stardust signal, Evelyn's journal suggested, could penetrate virtually anything that transmitted or received. What she needed was a place outside the network, a point where the alien energy couldn't be amplified or received. An analog sanctuary in an increasingly digital world. Her architectural background and Evelyn's eclectic collection of research came together. She remembered reading about specific types of historical structures, often Cold War-era bunkers or scientific outposts, designed to be completely shielded from electromagnetic interference, known as Faraday cages on a grand scale. They were built to protect against EMP attacks or to conduct highly sensitive experiments without external noise. One such location, mentioned briefly in a declassified memo Evelyn had meticulously annotated, was an old, abandoned seismological research station hidden deep within the sparsely populated desert lands near the Arizona-California border. It was built into a natural rock formation, using geological shielding and heavy lead lining to isolate its sensitive instruments from all external vibrations and electromagnetic signals. It was designed to detect the most minute tremors in the earth, not the whispers from the stars. Clara spent days preparing. She packed supplies, her great-aunt's most crucial journals, and a collection of her grandfather's old analog signal detection equipment, a portable oscilloscope, a spectrum analyzer, and a shortwave radio that ran on batteries. If the stardust signal was digital, an analog device might be able to capture its raw, unfiltered essence in a way that modern tech couldn't, offering a glimpse into the silence after the hum. The drive was long and arduous, pushing her old car across vast, desolate stretches of highway and then onto barely there dirt tracks. The desert, which had once felt so menacing, now seemed to offer a strange comfort, its emptiness a promise of escape from the pervasive hum. She finally found the research station, half buried in the side of a massive rock outcrop,
its entrance a heavy, rusted steel door camouflaged against the ruddy stone. It looked like a tomb, forgotten by time. She forced open the stiff, creaking door, descending into the cool, silent darkness within. The station was a maze of narrow corridors and small, instrument-filled chambers. Dust covered everything, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone and stale metal. Deep inside, she found the main observation chamber. It was completely encased in lead and thick concrete, designed to be utterly silent, utterly isolated. She set up her grandfather's old analog equipment, connecting the antenna to the station's internal, shielded wiring system. As she powered on the shortwave radio, she braced herself for static, for interference, for the ubiquitous hum that had become the background noise of her life. Instead, there was silence. A profound, absolute silence. No static, no interference, no whispers. Just the faint whirring of the old radio's internal components. It was the silence after the hum her great-aunt had promised. And then slowly, on the green screen of the portable oscilloscope, a single, pure, undisturbed waveform began to appear. It wasn't the chaotic pattern of the Stardust broadcast. It was something else. Something clean, something fundamental. It was the true, raw signal of the alien consciousness, isolated, no longer filtered through human manipulation. It was the last analog echo. The pure waveform on the oscilloscope screen was mesmerizing. It was the castaway in its truest form, unfiltered by military amplification or human manipulation. Clara watched, captivated, as the patterns subtly shifted, like a breath taken across unimaginable distances. This was the entity Evelyn had sought to understand, not the weaponized tool of Project Stardust. She adjusted the old shortwave radio, tuning it to the frequency indicated by the waveform. Through the static-free speakers, a sound emerged that was unlike anything she had ever heard. It wasn't language in the human sense, but a complex tapestry of melodic clicks, ethereal hums, and resonant tones that seemed to form intricate, ever-shifting patterns. It was the same sound her great-aunt had described in her dreams, now clear and undeniable. It was the voice of the alien consciousness. As Clara listened, the sounds seemed to interact with her own mind. She felt a profound sense of recognition, a connection that bypassed logic and resonated deep within her subconscious. Images flooded her mind, clearer and more vivid than any dream. She saw the vast crystalline landscapes, the purple skies, but this time they were whole, not fragmented. She saw the entity's perspective, not as a malevolent force, but as a vast, ancient intelligence, adrift and lonely, flung across the cosmos by an unimaginable catastrophe. It wasn't hostile. It was observing. It was learning. And the calling to the center of the maze in the collective nightmares wasn't a command. It was an invitation. The entity was not trying to control humanity. It was trying to communicate, to establish a connection using the only medium it understood, the shared space of the subconscious mind. But the images also revealed something else. They showed fleeting glimpses of Commander Thorne and the Project Stardust facility, but from the entity's perspective. They were not just amplifying its signal, they were twisting it, perverting its intent. They were using its natural inclination to connect and to share, transforming it into a tool for control. The call to the center in the manipulated dreams was designed to guide humanity, not to understanding, but to a predetermined state of compliance, a readiness for whatever agenda Project Stardust intended to unfold. The most shocking realization came with the final wave of images. The entity showed Clara a vision of the immediate future, a grand, global broadcast from Project Stardust. It would be a message of unity and peace, transmitted directly into the collective subconscious, overriding any remaining independent thought, creating a perfectly docile, controllable population. The preparation was almost complete. Clara recoiled, shaken to her core. The date of the broadcast was imminent, barely a week away. She had stumbled upon the ultimate mind control plot, a silent, pervasive takeover engineered by humans, using an innocent alien intelligence as their unwitting weapon. And she, alone in this shielded bunker in the middle of nowhere, was the only one who truly understood what was about to happen. The silence after the hum had delivered its terrifying message.
The vision of the global broadcast, the message of unity and peace that would erase free will, burned in Clara's mind. The date was set, barely a week away. Project Stardust was on the verge of its ultimate triumph, and she was the only one who truly understood the subtle, insidious horror of their plan. She couldn't simply expose them. Their control was too deep, their network too pervasive. Who would believe her? She needed to fight fire with fire, or rather, signal with signal. Evelyn's journals held the answer, a theory of a harmonic counter-frequency, a precisely tuned signal that, if broadcast at the right time and with enough power, could disrupt the Stardust entity's manipulated signal, allowing its true, benevolent invitation to break through. Clara knew the original Stardust signal was being amplified by Project Kronos and transmitted through the global communications infrastructure. Her counter-frequency needed to be just as pervasive, just as powerful. And it had to be analog, immune to the digital filtering and suppression of Project Stardust. She began to work feverishly in the shielded chamber, poring over Evelyn's complex equations, which detailed not just the alien signal, but also a theoretical neutralizing frequency. Her grandfather had been close, but Evelyn had refined the calculations over decades, convinced that a pure, analog counter-broadcast was the only way to sever Project Stardust's control. The shielded chamber became her sanctuary and her laboratory. She cannibalized parts from the old seismological equipment, combining them with her grandfather's analog radio gear. It was a crude, jury-rigged contraption of copper coils, vacuum tubes, and salvaged wiring, but its purpose was singular: to generate and broadcast the harmonic counter-frequency. The biggest challenge was power. The small batteries she had brought wouldn't be enough for a global broadcast. The station itself had a backup generator, an ancient diesel beast designed to power the delicate instruments during grid failures. It was offline, dormant for decades, but Evelyn's schematics provided the instructions to reactivate it. Days blurred into nights. Clara worked without rest, fueled by determination and a growing sense of dread. The global broadcast date loomed closer. Each night in her fitful sleep, the calling to the center in the collective dreamscape grew louder, more insistent. She felt the subtle shift in her own mind, the gentle nudge towards compliance, confirming the terrifying efficacy of Project Stardust's program. She was fighting for her own mind as much as for the world's. Finally, just hours before the scheduled global broadcast, she was ready. The crude emitter sat on the workbench, glowing with a soft, warm light from its vacuum tubes. The old diesel generator outside coughed to life, rumbling deep in the earth, sending vibrations through the lead-lined walls. She connected her device to the station's massive shielded antenna array, designed to capture the faintest whispers of the earth, now repurposed to shout into the digital storm. With a final, desperate prayer, Clara threw the main switch. The old station lights flickered, and a wave of pure, analog energy surged through the desert air. It wasn't a destructive pulse. It was a resonant frequency, a counter-hymn, designed to cut through the manipulated signal to reveal the true, benevolent invitation of the alien consciousness and to wake up a sleeping world. Clara's counter-frequency blasted into the night, an analog wave pushing back against the insidious digital broadcast of Project Stardust. For a terrifying minute, the world outside the shielded bunker seemed to descend into chaos. Lights across cities flickered and died, then surged back to life with blinding intensity. Digital devices worldwide experienced a mass reset, their screens going blank, then rebooting in a cascade of silent recalibrations. In the shielded chamber, the old seismological equipment, now repurposed, hummed and whirred with an almost impossible strain. On the oscilloscope, the pure alien waveform Clara had isolated began to battle. Project Stardust's manipulated signal, once a smooth, insidious curve, buckled and fractured under the assault of Clara's counterfrequency. The two signals clashed, creating a dissonant, painful screech that vibrated through the very rock of the bunker. Then, slowly, Clara's signal began to win. The manipulated waveform fractured completely, dissolving into static. The pure, melodic hum of the true alien consciousness, amplified and clarified by Clara's device, surged through the airwaves, untouched by Project Stardust's perversion. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation, a call to awaken, not to obey. Across the United States, and indeed around the globe, something profound shifted. Millions of people caught in the throes of the collective nightmare experienced a sudden, jarring jolt. The maze, which had been drawing them to its deceptive center, dissolved. The call to find the light became instead a call to look within. The subtle behavioral shifts Project Stardust had instilled began to unravel. People woke up from their sleep not with nightmares, but with a profound sense of clarity, a quiet determination, and a faint, echoing memory of a shared, beautiful, alien melody. Commander Thorne, in the subterranean control room of Project Stardust, watched in horror as her screens went dark, then rebooted, displaying only static. The crystalline shard in its containment field flickered erratically, its insidious hum silenced. Their grand Unity broadcast had been hijacked, overridden by an unknown, untraceable analog source. The global population was not compliant. They were aware. Clara, exhausted but triumphant, watched the oscilloscope. The pure alien waveform remained, steady and bright, no longer battling, but resonating gently. It was a new equilibrium, a true connection, free from manipulation. The castaway was finally heard, not as a tool, but as a voice. She knew her fight wasn't over. Project Stardust, though disrupted, would not simply vanish. They would come looking for the source of the counter-frequency. But as she disconnected her makeshift device and prepared to leave the shielded bunker, Clara knew she wasn't alone anymore. The world was waking up. The collective subconscious, once a tool for control, was now a network of awakened minds, subtly connected by the true, benevolent echo of the alien consciousness. As she stepped out of the bunker and into the clear, cool dawn of the Mojave, the desert no longer felt silent and menacing. It felt alive, charged with a new potential. The Stardust was still out there, its true message now finally heard, and Clara, a lone architect, had just given humanity a chance to truly dream again.